Energy, which will operate across the whole of the UK, including Northern Ireland, and the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero and the Northern Ireland Department for Economy are working together positively on the GB Energy Bill.
Jim Sharp.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to see the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland in her place, and I wish her well. We've had a friendship for some time. The Secretary of State will be aware of Northern Ireland's unique energy profile, where we are heavily dependent and reliant on oil as opposed to other nations across the United Kingdom. I think it's 68% of people in Northern Ireland use oil. Has the Minister of State taken into consideration when determining to cut winter fuel allowance, and what discussions were had with the Northern Ireland Executive in relation to doing so? Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Of course, I am aware that 2/3 of Northern Ireland homes use oil. The decision to means test winter fuel payments was not a decision the government wished to make, but was a result of the Conservative £22 billion worth of black hole. In Northern Ireland, the Executive has decided that winter fuel payments will continue to be paid to pension households with someone receiving pension credits. Now, I've checked the figures, and in Northern Ireland, an estimated over 26,000 people could be eligible for pension credits and the winter fuel payment, but are not receiving it. So I would encourage anyone who's eligible or knows someone who could be to check and apply if you can.
Clive James.
Number 2, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take questions 2 and 11 together. Northern Ireland is a great place to live, work and invest, something I and the Secretary of State have promoted in our over 120 visits and meetings. Growth is a key mission of this government, which is why we're supporting UK businesses through securing further investment and through our industrial strategy. The Chancellor will set out steps this government is taking to support growth across the UK on the 30th of October.
Clive Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Businesses in Northern Ireland are struggling to operate in a constantly shifting regulatory environment that is deterring investment and decreasing business confidence. It's no wonder that 1/3 of UK businesses want the government to reduce Brexit-related barriers like customs procedures, according to a recent survey by Santander. A starting point would be for agricultural trade. And so can the Minister update the House on progress in negotiating a new veterinary and plant health agreement with the EU?
I thank the member for raising this. Northern Ireland has recently secured, many businesses have secured excellent deals in Northern Ireland. EY bringing over 1,000 jobs, the Ballymena bus factory, Wright Bus, Hannah Farmer are some of those examples. We are working at pace on the veterinary agreement. We do want to reduce checks and the need for checks, doing all that we can to protect the UK internal market. This government has brought in economic stability in place of the economic chaos that we saw up to now, and Northern Ireland businesses will be the benefits of those.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for the Minister for her response. But it's all very well talking about an industrial strategy, but economists agree that if you increase national insurance contributions for employers, it reduces profits, reduces pay and leads to fewer jobs. So does the Minister agree that if a government does decide to raise taxes, perhaps to fund union pay rises, then employer national insurance contributions would be the last tax that you would choose if you want to support the Northern Irish economy?
It's hard to take lectures from the party opposite on investment and growth. We have had a change election. We will be investing in growth. Whatever is coming up in the budget, the member has only a week to wait to listen to what will be happening in the budget. In the meantime, we're going at pace. The International Investment Summit brought in considerable investment for companies that are based in Northern Ireland. We are moving on our industrial strategy, Invest 2035. We're investing in skills and getting people into work and transforming our health services, which is essential so that people who want to come to the Northern Ireland because of good health services and are well enough to work. All of this is a package for investment in Northern Ireland.
Chair of the committee, Tony Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, at last week's International Investment Summit, the Prime Minister and Chancellor announced a total of £63 billion of private investment into the UK economy. But what steps are the Secretary of State and the Minister for Northern Ireland taking to ensure that Northern Ireland is at the forefront of this government's efforts to stimulate that investment that's needed?
The Secretary of State went to the international summit with the First Minister and Deputy First Minister and are working together. The Ballymena bus manufacturer Wrightbus recently signed a deal of £100 billion to supply more than 1,000 buses to go ahead. That shows real business confidence in Northern Ireland. And the skills gap is another area we are really focusing on. I've met with wonderful skills providers across Northern Ireland to talk about how we get people into well-paid jobs and faster growth.
Kevin Bonavere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very good to hear from the Minister about the work being done to close the skills gap. Could the Minister provide further examples and her intentions going forward?
My honourable friend is quite right to raise the issue of the skills gap and economic inactivity in Northern Ireland. I have met with wonderful skills providers across Northern Ireland. For example, the Rural Women's Network, Bolster Community Care, Superstars, Disability Action NI, Ulster University and the Prince's Trust. There is a wealth of work being done on good skills support, and we in the UK Government want to work with the Executive to continue to support this. A reliable, bespoke skills offering is essential to future-proof Northern Ireland's key growth sectors.
Shadow Minister Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister talks about growth, but the Mid-South West region growth deal, which was paused by this government, now lies inactive with no direction, and reports that much-needed private sector business involvement is now withdrawing. Will the Minister accept that this government's handling of these growth deals and their pausing was haphazard? Will she apologise to the people affected, and will she enter urgent direct talks with businesses to get this back off the ground?
The Secretary of State and I are in constant talks with the deals and the deal providers. I know the value of both of these deals across Northern Ireland, not just to those regions affected. However, the Government faces a £22 billion black hole, and it's right that the Treasury considers all options on the table to address this, and we'll find out more in the budget just next week. The Mid-South West and the Causeway, Coast and Glens deals are being considered as part of the spending review, and the Government continues to work closely with the deals partners and the Executive, and I will continue with the Secretary of State to underline the importance of these deals to my ministerial colleagues in the Treasury.
Gavin Robinson.
We look forward to a positive conclusion to those discussions next week, and as the Minister knows, both representatives from the Mid-South West region deal and Causeway, Coast and Glens deal are in Westminster today. Can the Minister acknowledge that in working with businesses and in trying to encourage greater trade within our own country, the appointment of a chair of Intertrade UK was an important first step, but that work needs to start? The terms of reference need to be set, and business need to be able to engage with that body established to support trade within our country.
I agree with the Right Honourable Member that the need for Intertrade UK to get going and to work to encourage investment across between all of the regions and nations in the UK, and it will be very important for those terms of reference to be set, and we are working with them as fast as we can now that the chair is in place.
Gavin Robinson.
The Minister for that. The Minister will know that in discussions with her Cabinet colleagues, decisions have been taken to delay the agreement on parcels, to delay the agreement on customs, to avoid taking the decision on UK-wide labelling, and of course there are a myriad of other decisions that were made and supported by this House and supported by the then Labour Party that are required to be implemented from the Safeguarding the Union documents. She will know about the interface between trade and constitutional politics, and so can I urge her to engage with the Secretary of State, the Paymaster General and others within Cabinet to get on and deliver what business and the people of Northern Ireland need.
We are not alone as ministers to have faced all sorts of decisions that should have been taken by the previous government when we came into office 3 months ago. We have taken up those decisions on parcels, on every aspect that he mentions. He's right to raise them because we do need to work on these to ensure that we protect the UK internal market and ensure the best regime for business is possible.
Jim Allister.
Question 3.
Secretary of State.
The statutory instrument for the Northern Ireland Pet Travel Scheme has now been laid. The scheme significantly reduces the requirements associated with the original Northern Ireland Protocol and provides a stable and long-term arrangement for those travelling with their pets within the UK.
Jim Allister.
When the grip of EU law controls even the movement of our pets within the United Kingdom. Isn't it clear we've gone far too far in regarding Northern Ireland as EU territory? For that is the reason for this absurd regulation, which at the behest of the EU imposes passport pets if you want to bring your pet from GB to Northern Ireland. And there's no point in the Secretary of State saying it could have been worse. It shouldn't exist at all. When will this government get the EU off our backs and liberate the people of Northern Ireland and our pets from EU diktat?
Well, as I hope the honourable gentleman is aware, Northern Ireland pet owners will not face any checks and will not be required to hold a pet travel document. So I think in discussing this, there is an obligation on him and all of us to make sure that we present the facts so that people are not unnecessarily troubled.
Shadow Secretary of State Alex Burghardt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Executive's draft programme for government acknowledges that policing numbers in Northern Ireland are an all-time low, situation that Chief Constable Boucher has described dangerous. The draft programme commits to increasing numbers in line with New Decade, New Approach. Is the Secretary of State convinced that the budget sustainability plan is sufficient to achieve that aim?
Actually, I'm not quite sure it fits in with the question.
I was intending to come in on question 4.
Well, I think we'll wait then. Right, let us move on then. Dr. Lauren Sullivan.
Number 4, please, Mr. Speaker.
Now, where were we, Mr. Speaker? With permission, I will answer questions 4, 7 and 10 together. I welcome the publication of the Northern Ireland Executive's Budget Sustainability Plan, a positive and necessary step towards sustainable public finances, and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury has agreed with the Northern Ireland Finance Minister that discussions over a long-term fiscal framework for Northern Ireland can now begin.
Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree to ensure sustainable finances? The Northern Ireland Executive needs to take steps to reform the NHS and public services.
I certainly do share my honourable friend's view, because as the House will be aware, people in Northern Ireland face the longest waiting lists in the whole of the United Kingdom, and all governments, including the Northern Ireland Executive, have to balance the money they've got coming in, the funds that they can raise, and to take decisions about public service reform. I'm very encouraged by the recent event organised by the Northern Ireland Health Minister, at which Dr Bengoa, who produced a report on reform in Northern Ireland, returned, because there is now a commitment to take forward that process.
Deirdre Costigan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What impact does the Secretary of State think the UK leaving the European Convention on Human Rights would have on the sustainability of Northern Ireland's finances and devolved government?
Well, I say to my honourable friend that given that the European Convention of Human Rights is the foundation, one of the foundations of the Good Friday Agreement, I am frankly astonished that anyone who aspires to lead His Majesty's opposition should suggest that we should leave as a country the ECHR. It would be utterly irresponsible.
David Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to commend all those who worked to re-establish devolved government earlier this year at Stormont, but it's now vital that the Northern Ireland Executive ensures it has sustainable finances. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that revenue raising by the Northern Ireland Executive has an important part to play in delivering financial sustainability and stability to Northern Ireland?
I do, Mr. Speaker, and indeed raising £113 million was part of the deal that the last government put in place as part of the £3.3 billion package that led to the that followed on the restoration of the executive, and that includes delivering a balanced budget in the current year, and I'm very encouraged by the statements of the Northern Ireland Finance Minister in that regard.
Lockhart.
Mr. Speaker, the Budget Sustainability Plan is commendable, but would the Secretary of State agree with me that our public services are in crisis? Our roads are crumbling, we have the longest health waiting lists in the whole of the UK, and our schools need investment. Therefore, Northern Ireland needs to be in receipt of a fair, long-term funding allocation based on Treasury needs. And will he confirm to this House that he is making the case for that in Treasury for the people of Northern Ireland?
Well, the greater needs that Northern Ireland has for spending are recognised. That is why the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council was established, to answer the question, what should the level of that additional funding be? And they came to the conclusion the figure should be 124%, which is going to be met this year in respect to the budget. And the interim fiscal framework also said if further credible sources come along suggesting it should be a different figure, then the government would undertake to look at that. But nothing takes away from the executive's responsibility to manage the budget that it has got and to take decisions, including on reform.
Alex Easton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State agree with me that the resources for the budget for the Justice Minister are extremely short and that we are not able to recruit enough PSNI officers. Has he had any discussions with the Justice Minister how we're going to resolve that problem?
Well, as the honourable member will be aware, decisions about the allocation of the Northern Ireland budget rest with the Northern Ireland Executive. Funds go to the Justice Minister. The Justice Minister then decides principally how much to pass on to the Policing Board for policing costs and how much to deal with the justice system and the prisons, which are also under pressure. I recognise the pressures that PSNA officers face, not least because I met a number of them who were injured in the recent disorder.
Secretary of State Alex Burkhardt.
Very generous of you to call me again, Mr. Speaker. The Executive's draft programme for government acknowledges that policing numbers in Northern Ireland are at an all-time low, a situation which the Chief Constable has described as dangerous. The draft programme commits to increasing numbers in line with New Decade New Approach. Is the Secretary of State convinced that the budget sustainability plan is sufficient to achieve that aim?
Well, the honourable gentleman raises a very important point, as we've just discussed a moment ago. I recognise the pressures that are on the PSNI, but it does fall to the executive to decide, out of the funds it has available, how much it's going to allocate for policing alongside other needs for public services in Northern Ireland. And if they wish to allocate more, they're in a position to do so, but it does involve making a choice.
The Secretary of State is, of course, right that policing in Northern Ireland is a devolved issue, but national security is not. If we look at policing right now at an all-time low, we're reminded that his party's manifesto made explicit commitments to improve public services in Northern Ireland. Will the government commit to ensure that there is policing in Northern Ireland sufficient to keep the people of Northern Ireland safe and to maintain national security? And will he commit to protect the additional security funding of £32 million a year that comes direct from HMT?
Well, on the latter point that the honourable gentleman raises, he just has to wait a week to see what the budget produces. But I would simply say to him that the PSNI and the security services and others do an outstanding job in Northern Ireland protecting the people of Northern Ireland from terrorist threats, and we should all support them in that endeavour.
Democrat spokesperson Al Pinkerton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Budget Sustainability Plan highlights that Northern Ireland has been systemically underfunded, with the Fiscal Council estimating a shortfall of between 300 to 4 million annually since 2022. Meanwhile, the Northern Ireland Executive reported a 559 million overspend between 2022 and 24. Can the Secretary of State outline what measures the government is taking and will take to address Northern Ireland's immediate budgetary pressures, ensure long-term financial stability, equitable funding and, crucially, guarantee sustainable public services?
Well, in addition to the £3.3 billion that was the package following the restoration of the Executive gained an additional £185 million in July when the main estimates were published. And in order to avoid having to repay the debt that the honourable member refers to, they have to put their finances on a sustainable path, deliver a balanced budget and raise the additional revenue, £130 million, that they committed to do when the deal was done. The Fiscal Council's view is 124% to the right funding.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker.
The Government is committed to implementing the Windsor Framework in good faith and to protecting Northern Ireland's place in the UK internal market. We continue to take forward policies set out in safeguarding the Union, including most recently the establishment of the Independent Monitoring Panel and the publication of guidance under Section 46 of the UK Internal Market Act.
Robin Swan.
Concern in regards to the supply of medicines again to Northern Ireland. The British Generic Medicines Association says there's an absurd situation where shortages will be due to bureaucracy because of the UK only labelling that is required for medicines going into Northern Ireland. Mr. Speaker, the government say they're relaxed that that deadline will be made. Is the Secretary of State relaxed in regards to the continued supply of medicines coming into Northern Ireland?
Well, I would say to the Honourable Gentleman, it's really important that medicines that are required continue to be supplied. The industry has had quite a period of time to make arrangements to ensure that the labelling rules are met, and I hope very much in the time that is available, those companies that haven't done so will do so.
Sammy Wilson.
Question number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Having carefully considered the results of the consultation with industry, the Government decided not to proceed with the introduction of mandatory not-for-EU labelling in Great Britain from the 1st of October 2024. Instead, we will take the powers necessary to apply not-for-EU labelling in the future if that is required to secure supplies in Northern Ireland.
Samuel Wilson.
The result of the Northern Ireland Protocol signed by the previous government has been to create an economic border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, and also the imposition of EU law, which has created a problem for the supply of goods to Northern Ireland. The Labour Party, when in opposition, supported the idea of food labelling as a way of avoiding an interruption of supply of food goods from GB to Northern Ireland. Why has the government now reneged on a promise which it supported in opposition, and what will be the trigger for this imposition if it's needed?
Well, the consultation on UK-wide labelling led the industry to say this will impose huge cost on us and therefore cost on consumers, raising the price of goods. The purpose is to ensure that goods are not delisted in Northern Ireland. That is why we are going to take the power to ensure that if there is any evidence that that is happening, then the labelling requirements that were set out in safeguarding the Union can be applied, including on individual products on a sectoral basis.
Just a second, come back to Josh Newbury. He's just going to ask his question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Businesses in my constituency of Cannock Chase tell me they're facing increased red tape and costs when importing from or exporting to Northern Ireland. So could the Secretary of State confirm that he is committed to unfettered access for goods moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain?
I certainly can confirm that, and it indeed is set out in legislation in the UK Internal Market Act.
Mr.
Speaker.
Minister.
I congratulate my honourable friend on her new role as the leader of the SDLP, and I thank her for raising this really important issue. 7 women and girls have been killed violently in Northern Ireland this year alone. This is devastating. I've discussed the importance of action on violence against women and girls with the First and the Deputy First Minister, and I welcome the Northern Ireland Executive making this a priority in their programme for government and the new strategic framework.
Claire Hannah.
Thank you, Minister. Mary Ward in my constituency became the 4th woman to be murdered in just 6 weeks in Northern Ireland. It remains one of the most dangerous places in Europe to be a woman, with a femicide rate that is twice the rate of that of Britain, and we need to think very deeply about the type of society we have created that is manifesting in this way. The publication of the Northern Ireland Strategy on Violence Against Women recently was overdue and very welcome. Does the Minister agree with me that the funding and human resources attached to that strategy must be proportionate with the urgency and the deep roots of this issue, and will she support the Executive as they review the sentencing and judicial processes that are contributing to these very preventable deaths?
My thoughts are with the family and friends and all those affected by the murder of Mary Ward. Every woman deserves to feel safe. There is an what's been called an epidemic of violence against women and girls in Northern Ireland, and I do join with the member in welcoming the new strategy. We need stronger action by the justice system, more support for frontline services, tackling harassment wherever it is, in homes, schools, workplaces and on our streets, and challenging and changing misogynistic attitudes and behaviours. That will need urgent action, working together. This government stands ready to do this.
Sir David Davis.
I don't normally get such a cheer, sir. Number 9.
I meet regularly with the Chief Constable and his team to discuss a range of issues. While the Chief Constable has operational independence, the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office provides oversight of these powers to ensure that their use is necessary, proportionate and in accordance with the law.
David Davis.
Well, in a recent Investigatory Powers Tribunal, it became apparent that the Northern Ireland Police Force had been caught surveilling journalists' telephones on the basis that they had received secret documents from whistleblowers. The reason for the secrecy of those documents was to cover up the embarrassment of the RUC and the handling of the Loughlin Island massacre. Will he meet me to discuss the future use of surveillance powers by the Northern Ireland Police?
Well, I am indeed aware of the background to this case, and the original search warrants were quashed and the police investigation was discontinued. The Investigatory Powers Tribunal, as the Right Honourable Gentleman will know, is currently looking at this specific case. It would not be appropriate for me to comment while that's ongoing. The Chief Constable has set up the McCullough Review to look at the wider issue, and the Right Honourable Gentleman may well wish to make representations to that review.
We now come to questions to the Deputy Prime Minister, Adam Jogi.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I've been asked to reply. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is in Samoa to discuss shared opportunities in the Commonwealth, including how we work together to deliver economic growth. With increasing threats facing Britain, it is vital that we also strengthen the defence, security and cooperation with our allies, and that's why today this government signed a landmark defence agreement with Germany, which will help keep us safe and create hundreds of jobs. Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will join me in sending our best wishes to Sir Chris Hoy and his wife Zara. He is a true sporting legend, and the courage and positivities they have shown will inspire many others. Mr. Speaker, I also send our condolences to those affected by the train crash in Powys. Mr. Speaker, this morning I have had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For 14 years, my constituents in Newcastle-under-Lyme had suffered flatlining wages, in-work poverty and a battered economy that served nobody. Can I urge the Deputy Prime Minister to use the Employment Rights Bill to turn the page on the last 14 years, to give our businesses the support they need, and to finally restore dignity, prosperity and opportunity to the good people of Newcastle-under-Lyme?
Can I thank my honourable friend and welcome my honourable friend to his place? When this government took office, we promised the biggest upgrade to workers' rights in a generation, a new deal for working people. We said that we would introduce a bill within the first 100 days, and we've kept that promise. This is a Labour government led by working people for working people.
Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Deputy Prime Minister in paying tribute to the bravery of Sir Chris Hoy? He truly is an inspiration to us all, and I also echo her comments about the train crash in Powys. Mr. Speaker, what is the Deputy Prime Minister's definition of working people?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, let me start by welcoming the honourable gentleman to his new place. Today is our first exchange, Mr. Speaker, since he pushed for a July general election. And if his own side hasn't offered him a peerage, I certainly would have. And Mr. Speaker, the definition of working people are the people that the Tory party have failed for the last 14 years.
Oliver Dowden.
Well, the Deputy Prime Minister stood on a manifesto promising not to raise taxes on working people. It now appears she can't even define who working people are. So I'll give her another go. There are 5 million small business owners in this country. Are they working people?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know how the shadow Deputy Prime Minister can stand there with a straight face when it was the small businesses, the working people of this country that paid the price of them crashing the economy, sending interest rates scoring. I think he needs to learn his own lessons in opposition.
Oliver Dowden.
Well, I think the whole House will have heard the Deputy Prime Minister disregard 5 million hard-working small business owners. These are the publicans, the shopkeepers, the family running a local cafe. None of those count as working people to her. Now, Labour gave a clear commitment not to raise national insurance. The independent IFS have given their view on this. They say that raising employer national insurance is a tax on working people. Even the Chancellor said that raising employer national insurance was a jobs tax that will make each new recruit more expensive and increase the cost to business. So does she agree with the IFS and her own Chancellor?
Mr. Speaker, I remember the party opposite, what they said to business. What was it? F to business? Whereas this party held an international investment summit last week, which poured £63 million into our economy. We're pro-business, pro-worker, and getting on with fixing the mess that they left behind.
So I think we can take it from that answer that the Deputy Prime Minister doesn't agree with the IFS, and I suppose it shouldn't come as a surprise that she doesn't agree with her Chancellor. But does she agree with this? And I quote, "Working people will pay when employers pass on the hike in national insurance." Mr. Speaker, these are her words. So does she at least agree with herself?
Mr. Speaker, what I'm incredibly proud of is this week, this government brought in a new employment bill, which will raise the living standards of 10 million workers. Would the shadow Deputy Prime Minister like to apologise for the hiking taxes, 70-year hiking taxes that he put on working people, the crashing of the economy and the disaster that he left behind?
Well, she mentions her policy. Let's be clear, it's a £5 billion hit to the British economy, and that's her own assessment. Mr. Speaker, I think that following these answers, there will be millions of working people now even more worried about the tax rises coming their way in next week's budget. But as this is our last exchange across the dispatch box, I'd like to turn to somebody I hope we can all agree is a hard-working person, His Majesty the King. Yeah. Will she join me in sending him best wishes ahead of the Commonwealth Summit in Samoa? In particular, will she confirm that this government recognises the unique role played by the Commonwealth? And will she commit to deepening this relationship so that under His Majesty's leadership, we build upon possibly the greatest legacy of the late Queen?
Yeah. Deputy Prime Minister.
I will miss our exchanges. The battle of the gingers, the late nights voting. And in that spirit, Mr. Speaker, I will agree with my right honourable friend. The King does a tremendous job, and so did the late Queen, and the Commonwealth is very important, and that's why the King and the Prime Minister at the moment are working together. Thank you.
Yeah. Oliver Dowden.
Well, I thank the Right Honourable Lady for that answer. Our Commonwealth family is brought together by historical and cultural ties, indeed, much like the pair of us. But I will resist, Mr. Speaker, the temptation to replicate that. But as we look to the Commonwealth's future, we now have the opportunity to deepen our economic relationship. Will she therefore assure the House that the Prime Minister will use this summit to continue the work begun by the last government in building deeper economic ties with our Commonwealth friends and allies?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we talk about economics. The architect of the 2024 Tory general election campaign, doing his victory lap before retiring with the hereditary peers that he fought so hard to protect, he leaves behind a Tory party in utter denial, heads in the sand, refusing to accept the rejection by the British public. Their plan for Britain, Mr. Speaker, includes scrapping the minimum wage, cutting maternity pay and tax breaks for the big oil companies. Mr. Speaker, this Labour government is elected to end the Tory chaos.
Dr Evans, you've got a sore neck. I wish it was your throat a little. Come on, Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, they don't like to hear it, but this Labour government was elected to end the Tory chaos, and that's exactly what we're doing. £600 more in the pockets of insecure workers, 30,000 new dads given paternity leave, and 10 million working people better off. While their so-called leadership candidates argue about what went wrong, this Labour government is getting on with rebuilding Britain.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, like many MPs, have heard many heart-rending stories of constituents who have had poor end-of-life support. Yet, had palliative care been available alongside an end-of-life plan, their experiences could have been so different. Would the Deputy Prime Minister agree to set up a commission for palliative and end-of-life care so that everyone can access the very best support when terminally ill and have a peaceful and dignified death, and will she meet to discuss it?
I thank my right honourable friend for raising what is an emotive subject on both sides of this House. I know from my own work in this area before I was in this place what an incredible work this is, and the honour it is to be there for somebody at the end of their life. Discussions have begun now on how to improve access to palliative and end-of-life care, and I'll ensure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss this issue.
Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I associate myself and the Liberal Democrats with the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks about Chris Hoy and all those involved in the train crash. Our NHS is bracing itself for a winter crisis. And one of the causes of the winter crisis every year is that there are thousands of people in hospitals who are fit to go home, but they can't be discharged because there are not the care workers in place to enable people to recover at home or in a care home. Would the Deputy Prime Minister consider the Liberal Democrats' idea of an NHS winter task force to winter-proof our NHS, end this cycle of the winter crisis and put to an end the scandal of hospital patients paying the price of the social care crisis left by the Conservatives?
I thank the honourable lady for her comments, and I share with her her desire to ensure that care workers are given the respect and the importance that they deserve. They are critical, in my opinion, to solving the problems within our National Health Service, and it's the Labour Party that will create a national care service, and we're launching our first ever fair pay agreement for care professionals to boost recruitment and retention. We must get the NHS back on its feet after the disaster of the Conservatives, and my right honourable friend the Chancellor will have more to say in the budget.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for her answer. We stand ready as a party of constructive opposition to work with the government to fix our social care system. However, one of the measures that could make it harder for us to keep the carers that we so desperately need would be an increase in employers' national insurance contributions. Were that measure to go ahead, it would affect millions of small businesses, including 18,000 small care providers. Can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister to assure this House that there will be nothing in the budget that makes it harder for vulnerable people to access the care workers and the care that they desperately need?
Well, again, I won't speculate on the budget, not least with the Chancellor that sat at the side of me. But what I will say, and I'll reiterate what the Chancellor has said and what the Prime Minister has said, this will be a budget that recognises that working people of this country and the enterprise in this country has been hard hit by the 14 years of Conservatives. We will rebuild Britain and we will grow our economy to pay for our public services.
Chris MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This next year marks the 200th anniversary of the Stockton to Darlington Railway, but the rail industry in my area is currently in peril, with hundreds of jobs at risk at Hitachi Rail as a consequence of a lack of action from the previous government. Will my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, join me and our honourable friend, the member for Newton Aycliffe and Spennymoor, with workers, management and trade unions to ensure that no stone is left unturned as we fight for the future of this Hitachi Rail factory?
I thank my right honourable friend for that question and welcome him to his place. He's been a champion for workers at Newton Aycliffe from day one, and I know he's met with the Transport Secretary, and I can assure him that we're in close contact with Hitachi on operations to secure a sustainable future for Newton Aycliffe, and we're committed to a long-term industrial strategy for rolling stock, seeking to support British manufacturing and end the volatility of recent years.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In today's spirit of cross-party working, will the Deputy Prime Minister join me in applauding the brave Labour staff members who've travelled across the Atlantic to campaign against Donald Trump?
Mr. Speaker, I'm loving this loving. I don't often get it. But I say to the honourable gentleman is that people in their own time often go and campaign, and that's what we've seen. It happens in all political parties. People go and campaign and they do what they want to do in their own time with their own money.
Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like many in my constituency of Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, my family knows what it means to raise and support a disabled child. Charities like the Yard in Kirkcaldy do an amazing job providing vital additional help to disabled children and their families. Last month, a survey found that our country is so broken that 3/4 of parents of children with special educational needs and disabilities have been forced to give up work or cut their hours. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree that our Labour government must tackle this intolerable reality?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend and pay tribute to those that work with children with special educational needs and disabilities. I myself have my amazing son who does tremendously well given his challenges that he faced in life. I know from personal experience the system is just not working for children and families. Future funding decisions will need to be taken as part of the upcoming spending review, Mr. Speaker, but we will work with the sector to deliver our shared mission and restore parents' trust.
Peter Bedford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just 3 months into this Labour government, we have seen brutal cuts to support for pensioners. We have seen the taxing of education, and we have seen just this week £5 billion of additional pressure put on British businesses. Why does this government have such a problem with aspiration?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member might not have been in this place, and I welcome him to his place now during the last Parliament, but it was his government that left a £22 billion backlog. It was his government that left us with the biggest housing crisis. It was his government that crashed the economy, and it was his government that saw interest rates, inflation go to 11%, where pensioners were worse off than they are now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Deputy Prime Minister, I watched in horror and condemned the act of October the 7th by the terrorist group Hamas. A year later, I watched in horror as 42,000 people are killed in Gaza, 11,000 of them children, people burned alive, attached to drips, aid workers killed, and now families are starving. Our right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has said that the world will not stand by and see this the lack of humanitarian assistance. If the Israeli government will not listen to our Prime Minister's words, what tangible, measurable actions will we take as the UK-British government?
I thank my honourable friend for raising this really serious and important issue. The humanitarian situation in northern Gaza, Mr. Speaker, is dire, and we need an immediate ceasefire and much more aid allowed to flow in and an immediate release of all the hostages. We have suspended UK export licences to Israel for items which might be used in the current conflict, and this government has concluded that there is a clear risk that items exported to Israel might be used in serious violations of international humanitarian law in Gaza. This does not change our position, Mr. Speaker. Instead, support for Israel's security, but we will always do so in a manner consistent with our obligations to domestic and international law.
David Simmons.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our child protection services have had to deal with a number of cases where parents and carers have argued that their fatal actions were lawful punishment. So I'd like to ask the Deputy Prime Minister, will she bring forward legislation bringing the rest of our country into line with Scotland and Wales so that all children enjoy unambiguous protection in law against violence?
I think it's a very important point that the Right Honourable Gentleman raises, and I'll make sure that the Minister has a meeting with him. But the first job of any government is to protect the citizens, and that includes our children, and we'll make sure we work across the House to deliver that.
Caroline Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Friday was International Menopause Day, and the government announced Mariella Frostrop as the new Menopause Employment Ambassador. Mariella will be working across Whitehall to ensure every department recognises the need to support women through their menopausal years. Hopefully, Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister will join me in celebrating this appointment and confirm that this government will do all they can to keep menopausal women happy, healthy and wonderful.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for all of her work in this area. This government will boost protections for women experiencing menopause symptoms at work, and I'm proud that we've appointed Mariella Frostrop as the new Menopause Employment Ambassador. She is a powerful champion who will work with employers across the country to raise awareness, improve workplace support for women and help them stay in work and progress in their careers.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Charlie from my constituency of Esher and Walton is an 8-year-old boy with an autism diagnosis who has been out of school for almost a year. He is one of 1,800 children in Surrey missing school because of a lack of appropriate special educational needs provision. Will the government commit to ending this scandal by properly funding special educational needs provision in next week's budget, so that children like Charlie in my constituency of Esher and Walton and beyond are no longer let down?
I thank the honourable member for her very important question, and I'm sorry to hear about what Charlie and many other children with special educational needs have gone through. We know we've inherited a really dire situation. Many members across this House have raised this issue, and that I'm sure the Chancellor have heard what she said and that she will be upcoming in the budget.
Mike Tarr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning we woke to more tragic news of deaths in the Channel, something that we're hearing far too often. Just last month we saw the death of a pregnant woman and children. Children, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Deputy Prime Minister what this government is doing to take on the evil smuggling gangs who are trading in human misery.
I thank my honourable friend and welcome him to this place and his expertise within the National Crime Agency. And he knows that we inherited an asylum system in chaos. And as he quite rightly says, these are people, women, children. We are putting in place a credible plan to protect our borders and remove those with no right to be here by setting up our Border Security Command, backed by £75 million of investment, and we're working with our international partners to target and disrupt the criminal smuggling gangs.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
Will the government please continue to work closely with West Lindsey District Council and myself to ensure that RAF Scampton is sold off in a timely fashion at a fair price so that we secure the future of the runway, the spaceport and the Heritage Centre, rather than maximise value and cover it with housing?
I thank the honourable member, the Father of the House, for his question. My right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is taking urgent action to clear the backlog of cases, reducing the use of asylum accommodation and saving millions for the taxpayers. And I will ensure that the right honourable member is kept fully updated as the decommissioning disposal process of Scampton is followed.
Dame Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, in my constituency, hundreds of leaseholders, tenants and shared owners are living in properties with cladding and other defects in their properties, and thousands around the country. Their lives are on hold. Many are facing bankruptcy, delaying having children, unable to move. We've had another change in ministerial responsibility. Will the Deputy Prime Minister take a personal lead on keeping on top of this? Because after the years since Grenfell, they're still living in limbo and need some hope of change.
I thank my honourable friend for this really important question. And I say from the outset, the pace of remediation has been too slow. And I do take a personal lead in this. 7 years on from the Grenfell Tower tragedy, it is unacceptable that so many buildings still have unsafe cladding. I'm meeting with developers, mayors, regulators and national building safety bodies to press the urgency of this work. And I will make sure action is being taken to make sure that homes are safe.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Shropshire's farmers have been suffering from flooding following 18 months of incredibly wet weather, topped off last Wednesday by in 24 hours by the month's worth of rain. They weren't eligible for the Farming Recovery Fund, and a Freedom of Information request by Farmers Weekly found that only £1.2 million of that £50 million has been handed out to farmers. Will the government consider extending the eligibility of that scheme so that we can keep farmers going when they're deluged by floodwater?
Well, I'm really sorry to hear the plight of the Shropshire farmers, and we inherited a flood defence programme in disrepair. Thanks to 14 years of mismanagement and failure, communities are unprotected and families and businesses are forced to pay the price. We launched a flood defence task force to turbocharge the delivery and coordination of flood defences, and we're investing in £1.5 billion this year to scale up flooding national resilience. Now make sure she gets a meeting with the Minister.
Anna Dixon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Government has delivered on its manifesto commitment to introduce the Employment Rights Bill in its first... This includes a historic fair pay agreement for care workers and will benefit all those who care for older and disabled adults like those in my constituency of Shipley. Will the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that care workers deserve pay and conditions that match the amazing work they do to support our loved ones to have a fulfilling life?
I thank my honourable friend and welcome her to her place. As a biased former care worker, I'll always champion carers and the complex quality and professional work that they do. I absolutely agree that care workers deserve the pay and conditions to match their enormous contribution to our community, and I'm proud to say that we're delivering that fair pay agreement that will give the carers the recognition that they deserve and will make sure that those carers are able to deliver the best possible care to our loved ones.
James McCleary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last month, a widely reported study from Aston University Business School showed that UK goods exports to the EU are 27% down and imports 32% lower than they would otherwise have been, thanks to the Conservatives' failed Brexit deal. Will the Deputy Prime Minister tell me what steps this government is taking as part of their reset with the EU to cut Brexit red tape for small businesses to help our economy get growing again?
Well, I welcome the right honourable member to his place and his right to advocate for small businesses. They are the backbone of our economy. This government is turning the page on the relationship with Europe, reinvigorating alliances and forging new partnerships rather than reopening the divisions of the past. We will improve the UK's trade and investment relationship with the EU, tearing down unnecessary barriers to trade. This will not involve rejoining the single market, customs union or reintroducing freedom of movement, but we will get that relationship better.
Rachel Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 27,000 people in the cities of London and Westminster live in the private rented sector. After 14 years of neglect and delay, they face damp and mould in their homes, they risk no-fault eviction and out-of-the-blue rent hikes. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that the Renters' Right Bill currently in committee will transform life for private renters and finally rebalance power between tenants and landlords?
I thank my honourable friend and I welcome her to this place. And I'm incredibly proud of the Renters' Rights Bill that we're pushing through Parliament, because too many renters are being exploited by a minority of unscrupulous landlords unable to challenge bad practices because they could be evicted at any moment. The party opposite shunters, they promised the electorate this, they failed to deliver. We will deliver.
Lane Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Communities across the country, including in Bedfordshire, recently experienced widespread flooding. The village of Malden in my constituency has experienced an increase in flooding following cumulative housing development. As the Deputy Prime Minister requires communities across the country to build more homes, will she also ensure that those new developments do not increase flooding risk?
Again, I thank the honourable member for raising and also welcome him to his place. We recognise the devastating impact flooding can have. I know the flooding minister visited Bedfordshire in September to meet with volunteers and residents. We inherited flood defences that are in disrepair and behind schedule. We've launched a flood resilience task force, and when it comes to the planning reforms, Mr. Speaker, needed to deliver the 1.5 million homes this country needs, we will ensure that the right infrastructure is in place and communities are resilient.
Kim Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Zoe's Place in the West Derby area of Liverpool is a hospice providing support to sick children and their families. It's been threatened with closure, has to find £5 million by the end of the year. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that hospices like these need to be on a statutory footing and not reliant on charitable funding?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and the hospice situation in this country has faced significant challenges because of the 14 years of devastation under the Conservatives. The Health Secretary has already raised these issues and knows that this is of importance, and I'll make sure she gets a meeting.
Final question, Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Deputy Prime Minister will know that my constituency in Lincolnshire as a whole is the breadbasket of Britain, producing 12% of the food that's consumed across the entire nation, 30% of the vegetables, 20% of the sugar beet and so on. She will know that's because of the Grade 1 and 2 land in Lincolnshire. And yet Lincolnshire faces an invasion of giant pylons down the east coast and huge solar developments. So will she meet a delegation of colleagues from Lincolnshire and nearby, including my honourable friend for Louth and Sleaford and the Farnborough Hills, so that we can establish that energy security must never be the competitor with food security?
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question, and he will know that we launched a consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework. We will protect agricultural land. We will ensure that we have renewable energy, so we have energy security in this country, and we will get Britain building again.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. I'll let the front benches change over. Bench is not just to keep walking through, but to do the statements. Right. Secretary of State for the Environment and Rural Affairs, Steve Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, I would like to update the House on action this government is taking to fundamentally transform our water industry and clean up our waterways for good. 14 years of Conservative failure has left our water sector in disrepair. The rivers, lakes and seas we all love have record levels of pollution. Severe droughts are set to leave parts of the country facing significant water shortages by 2050, particularly in the southeast. And water companies forecast England will need to find an extra 5 billion litres of water a day to fill the gap between supply and demand by that same year. A rising population and the increasing impacts of climate change are putting strain on the water system. Firmer action should have been taken by the previous government to ensure money was invested to fix the water and sewage system. Instead, they allowed that money to be siphoned off for bonuses while our water infrastructure crumbled. A secure water supply is essential for every home and business up and down this country. It is the foundation of our economy, our communities, and our global security. It is essential to life itself. We use water to cool power stations, and it is vital to our electricity supply. We use water to grow the crops that provide the food we put on our plates, and we use it to supply our leisure industries. Without a resilient water supply, we cannot build the new homes and critical infrastructure we need to grow the economy. Concerns about pollution, water shortages, bill increases and the sector's financial resilience all point to the need for profound change. The water sector needs a complete reset, with a reformed water sector working in partnership with government to bring in the investment we need. We need a clear long-term plan to ensure the sector puts customers and the environment first and can attract the investment to upgrade our infrastructure. We need a water system fit for the future. We cannot clean up our rivers, lakes and seas overnight, but we have a plan and the work of change has started. On the 11th of July, I made a statement to the House on the agreement I reached with water companies and Ofwat to ring-fence money earmarked for investment in water infrastructure so it can no longer be diverted for shareholder payouts and undeserved bonus payments. On the 9th of September, we introduced the Water Special Measures Bill, setting out new measures, including strengthening regulation to ensure water bosses face personal criminal liability for serious and repeated law-breaking, giving the water regulator new powers to ban the payment of bonuses if environmental standards are not met, and boosting accountability for water executives through a new code of conduct. Today, I'm pleased to announce the third stage of our plan. We are launching an independent commission together with the Welsh Government, which will lead the biggest review of the water industry since privatisation 35 years ago. The Commission will ensure we have the robust regulatory framework we need to attract the significant investment required to clean up our waterways, build new infrastructure to address water scarcity and restore public confidence in the sector. I am delighted it will be led by the former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, Sir John Cunliffe, who comes with decades of economic and regulatory experience. Sir John will be supported by an advisory group of experts covering areas including the environment, public health, engineering, customers, investors and economics. He will seek advice from wider groups of stakeholders, including environmental campaigners, consumer champions, water companies, regulators and the public at large. The Commission will conduct a root and branch review of the water sector's regulatory system. It will cover the water industry in England and Wales and the strategic planning framework under the Water Framework Directive and River Basin Management Plans to ensure strategic water planning across sectors is effective at a catchment, regional and national scale. Where housing, planning and agriculture and drainage interlink with strategic planning across the water system, these are also in scope. The Commission will set a new framework for the future. It will not make recommendations which affect the current Price Review 24 process to ensure a stable climate for investment as that process concludes. It will be pragmatic and focus on reforms that will improve the privatised regulatory model. Nationalisation of the water sector will not be in scope, because of the high costs of buying out the current owners, lack of evidence that it would lead to improvements, and the long delays it would cause in cleaning up polluted water and serving customers better. The Commission will make recommendations in the first half of 2025, reporting to me as the Secretary of State for the Environment and to the Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Climate Change and Rural Affairs in Wales. Once the Commission has made its recommendations, the UK Government and Welsh Government will respond and consult on proposals, including subsequent legislation. Further details on the Commission's scope, delivery approach and timelines are set out in its terms of reference, which will be available on gov.uk today. This Government will deliver an ambitious, long-term and collaborative approach to reforming the water sector, creating a strong new partnership between government, water companies, customers, investors and all those who work to protect our precious environment. The Commission will set the groundwork for the reformed water sector we want to see, and I would like to thank Sir John for leading this important work. This is our opportunity to make sure our children and their children have the chance to create memories that will last a lifetime, to splash about at the seaside, to row on our rivers, or enjoy a picnic by the lakeshore. This is our opportunity to inject billions of pounds into the economy and power UK growth by attracting global investment into a transformed water sector. This is our opportunity to clean up our water once and for all.
Shadow Minister Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for prior sight of his statement. 14 years in opposition, and this is what the Labour Party has to offer. When they've had more than a decade to craft a clear package of policies, listen to campaigners and prepare to govern, and yet this is what they've brought to the House today, which illustrates, Mr. Speaker, not a sign of any ambition. Mr. Speaker, this is a sign of hesitation. It's a way to delay the difficult decisions and buy themselves more time. It's part of a growing trend that, unfortunately, we're seeing consistently from this new Labour government. Across all government departments, announce a review, a task force, and yet another commission. And the hope that the public doesn't notice that really they never had much of a plan at all. Mr. Speaker, this approach is simply not going to wash with the bill payers. During the election, the Secretary of State was touring around the country with campaigners like Fergal Sharkey, promising radical change to the sector. But here, he's now in power, and if you look at it, what has he actually achieved so far? The Secretary of State spent the entire election campaign, for example, telling voters that he wanted to put water company bosses, quote, in the dock, unquote. But if you look at what they've actually achieved through the announcements of their Water Special Measures Bill, it will not do such a thing, as campaigners and industry experts have already pointed out. And what this Water Special Measures Bill will also do is provide no reassurance whatsoever to investors. In fact, the Secretary of State has rather marvellously managed to frustrate not only campaigners, but also disenfranchise investors from any long-term aspirations for their investment within the sector. Next, the Secretary of State says that he announced a ban on water company bonuses. But hang on, that was actually a policy that we brought forward in our time in government, which the Secretary of State is now attempting to re-announce and pass off as his own. It was the Conservatives that announced a ban on water company bosses, linked shareholder dividends to environmental performance, quadrupled water company inspections, fast-tracked investment to cut spills, and launched a whistleblowing portal for water company workers to report breaches. It's frankly surprising then to hear the Secretary of State claim that his government is truly serious about this issue, when their proposals are less firm than the measures that were delivered by the previous Conservative government. He could take real action right now by progressing plans for an automatic ban on water company bosses' bonuses when offences take place, as put forward by the last Conservative administration. And, Mr. Speaker, rehashing announcements the previous Conservative government already set in motion, putting forward policies that won't actually put more pressure on water company bosses, and then simply pressing pause with a year-long review is not going to result in the widespread change that Labour promised their voters. Mr Speaker, the Secretary of State acknowledges as well that the announced review will make no recommendations which will affect the current Price Review 24 process, meaning that there will be no chance of any significant change that this government is considering making until 2029 at the earliest. So could I ask the Secretary of State to provide an outline of the timeframe associated with actual recommendations which will come from the review being implemented and put in place? When is any real benefit from this further review task force commission likely to be experienced, not only from the water industry in terms of infrastructure improvements, but also by the bill player and improvements on the environment? Because it seems to me that this is just a Secretary of State kicking the can down the road through another review, another task force and another commission, and removing himself from having to do any of or make any of the tough decisions. The Secretary of State also makes reference within his statement that the review will not impact the Price Review 24 process. So could the Secretary of State outline exactly when these positive impacts will take place? Because from my calculations, it's not going to be until 2029 at the earliest. Could the Secretary of State also outline how the review will impact measures which are proposed by the government on the Water Special Measures Bill, and what will be done if the recommendations do not sync comfortably with the current proposals in the bill? Mr Speaker, one can't help but conclude that the Secretary of State is out of depth on this issue, can't deliver on the tough language that he promised in the run-up to the general election, and is now doing nothing more than attempting to kick the tough decisions down the road into the long grass. Mr Speaker, this seems to be a Secretary of State which is all bark and no bite.
Well, that was all a little bit embarrassing, wasn't it? 14 years in power, our rivers, lakes and seas are washed with record levels of pollution, and this is all the Conservatives have to say. I took action 7 days after the general election. I brought the Water Chief Execs into my office, and we agreed that money earmarked for investment will be ring-fenced, so it can't be diverted to pay multi-million-pound bonuses to Water Chief Execs who are overseeing failure in the water sector, as they were able to on his watch. This commission will reset the sector they broke and clean up the water they polluted, and it will report to this government in June and inform subsequent legislation.
Giamora.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And at the weekend, I went swimming in the North Sea, probably the last time this year, but having first checked with the Surface Against Sewage website that there had not been any legal or illegal spills. It is disgraceful that the last Conservative government left our seas and waterways in this state, but also notable that Water UK continuously blame the regulator for not allowing them to raise prices enough to invest further in our system. Would the Secretary of State make sure that we assess the extraction of value that the water companies in billions in profits and hundreds of millions in bonuses to make sure that future investment adds value and doesn't take it away?
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend for her comments. Customers, unfortunately, have been left to pay the price of 14 years of Conservative failure to secure investment in our water infrastructure, so it has collapsed to such an extent that Ofwat is now recommending eye-watering bill increases. Every penny of that is down to the failure of the party opposite. Our reset will ensure that kind of catastrophic failure can never happen again.
Spokesperson Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm really grateful to the Secretary of State for an advance sight of this statement, and to a very large degree I welcome it, at least the intention behind it. But we have a situation where water companies in 2023 dumped 54% more sewage into our lakes and our rivers and our coastal areas than in the previous year. That is 464,000 spills, including many in the lakes and rivers of Westmoreland. We are, Mr Speaker, the most beautiful part of England and also the wettest. And so water is deeply personal to us. So does he understand, then, my worry that we might have gone from having a Conservative government that would not face up to this outrage or tackle it, to having a new Labour administration that has acknowledged this outrage and decisively resolved to have a jolly good think about it? Does he wonder, while Thames water crumbles as we speak, And while water companies seek water bill increases of 40% despite such poor performance across the country, does he really think that having a commission is necessary given the urgent need for action? We have a fragmented, under-resourced and underpowered regulatory system which allows powerful water companies to play regulators off against each other while our constituents pay the price. So isn't the solution obvious? To create, as the Liberal Democrats propose, a new, unified, far more powerful, clean water authority? Does he share my deep concern that for environmental failure, the current regulator has to give 25 years' notice in order to strip a water company of its licence? Will he agree to ensure that this ludicrous protection for failing companies should be replaced by a 6-month period of notice instead? We are already more than 5% of the way through this Parliament. This is one of the constituents, all of our constituents' most pressing concerns. Do we have to drag our heels like this?
I thank the Right Honourable gentleman for his comments, and of course he's absolutely right to point out that last year we saw the highest levels of sewage ever recorded in our rivers, lakes and seas. No wonder the public are so angry, including in his constituency, and Lake Windermere, of course, an iconic and beautiful site, tragically polluted with sewage and agricultural runoff because of the failures of the previous governments. Now, I've taken action already. We had that reset moment just 7 days after the general election, carrying out within a week things they failed to do in 14 years in power. We've got the Special Measures Bill going through the Houses of Parliament right now to ban the payment of unfair bonuses to water bosses. This commission, led by Sir John Cunliffe, will look at the entire sector, root and branch, including governance and regulation, which he is pointing to, and it will look specifically at the point that he's just raised so that we can end up with a system of regulation that is fit to clean up our waterways and then protect them for the decades to come.
Torsten Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Secretary of State for his statement and for the announcement of this review, which is very important. And to have Sir John Cunliffe, a long-term public servant, running it is very welcome indeed. Can he say a bit more about how the close working between the Welsh and the UK government will work? Because that will be very important to how this has effect for my constituents in Swansea West.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. Of course, he's alluding to a very important point. Rivers and water catchments are no respecters of boundaries, and it's important that we get a model that works within catchments, including where those cross boundaries, as they do in some cases between England and Wales. This review has been jointly commissioned by the UK and the Welsh governments. It will jointly report to both governments, and it will seek to look at a better model for structuring and supporting our water sector so that we can ensure that we clean up all of our rivers, all of our lakes, all of our seas, so the public can get back to enjoying them, and we can bring in the investment to support the infrastructure delivered at pace to drive economic growth in every single part of the United Kingdom.
We come to the Chair of the Select Committee, Alistair Carmichael.
Speaker, the Secretary of State is quite right to point to the role of the payment of bonuses and dividends in coming to this point, but he must surely acknowledge that that is far from being the whole story, and that there are a number of business and accounting practices in companies like Thames Water that have brought us to the stage where we are today. If he's serious about having a water system that's fit for the future, we have to understand properly what has gone on before. So can he confirm that the Commission will be properly resourced with the necessary forensic accounting resource so that those who have been responsible for the most egregious practice in the past, who now seem to be appearing in other water companies around the country, will not be allowed to do the same thing there?
Well, I thank the Chair of the Select Committee for his intervention and the points that he makes. Of course, he's right. The Special Measures Bill with the ban on bonuses is not going to be sufficient to reset the sector, although it is an ask that the public are quite rightly making because of the unfairness of people who are overseeing failure being richly rewarded for that failure. It should not have been allowed to go on under the previous government. It will not go on under this new government. Now, the reason we've set up this commission legislation is to address the very points he makes about financial and indeed environmental sustainability and viability moving into the future. I look forward to working with him and his committee as the Commission carries out its work, as we review its findings in the summer of next year, and as we then shape what will be very, very significant new legislation to reset the sector, a reformed sector in a new partnership with government to bring in the investment that will finally clean up our waterways.
Helena Dollimore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I declare an interest as a customer of Southern Water who lost my water supply for 5 days earlier this year, along with 30,000 of my constituents in Hastings and Rye. As the Secretary of State knows well from his visits to Hastings and to Rye, we have major issues from flooding to sewage to water outages. I welcome this Water Commission, and can I ask the Secretary of State how my constituents in Hastings and Rye, and particularly volunteer groups like the Clean Water Action Group, can have their voices heard, and particularly their concerns about ensuring regulators have the power and resources to clean up our sea?
I thank my honourable friend. She is indeed a powerful campaigner for cleaner water. It's hard to think of anybody who has campaigned harder on the issue in fact. The Commission will be seeking to engage the public at large, as well as a wider group of stakeholders who will be represented on an advisory group. That will also include a customer voice. Once the Commission has reported, the Government will consult on those findings, and that will inform subsequent legislation that will reset this sector once and for all.
Can I just gently say to the Secretary of State, I'm here and we're going through the chair, not to the member, not once for the last two questions. So if we can work together to get everybody to work in the right way. We'll have a good example now, Mr Gavin Williams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And in my constituency of Stonebreak, Worley and Penkridge, we have beautiful rivers, the great and mighty River Trent, as well as the River Penk. And over the last few years, with more transparent data that is available, we've been seeing the number of sewage discharges going into these rivers. Can the Secretary of State promise the House that actually looking at how we reduce those sewage discharges into the Trent and into the River Penk are going to be at the heart of what this Commission does?
Yes, it's always a pleasure, of course, to gaze at you, Mr Speaker, rather than elsewhere in the chamber. The right honourable gentleman makes a very important point. Of course, the point of the Commission is to identify ways in which we can strengthen regulation and operations so that we can bring in the investment, clean up our water sector once and for all, and reduce and remove the pollution that is destroying so many beautiful rivers, including those in his constituency.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Now, can I just congratulate the Secretary of State for this commission that's been set up today, because it is absolutely fantastic. Gower, it was the first area of outstanding natural beauty in the whole of the United Kingdom. The bathing waters there are second to none, but some of them are less so. And I'd like to highlight to him how I have set up a campaign to test the bathing water in the winter season with my constituents and with local business and the Gower Society, because data, as has been said, is really, really key, and it's what will drive the improvement of our bathing water forward. So would he congratulate Surfers Against Sewage, who have been really supportive, and everybody in my constituency that's taken part and taken control. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I thank my honourable friend. She does indeed represent an incredibly beautiful part of the country in the Gower, and her constituents, and indeed many of those who visit those beauty spots, will want to know that their children can go and enjoy the water without risk of contamination from polluted water. Of course, I congratulate Surfers Against Sewage, the many campaigners who have pushed for reform. They will be invited to participate in the work of the Commission as well. They have huge expertise, and I hope that before long, her constituents who are testing the quality of the water will start to see improvements until it is pure and crystal clear, as it should always have been.
Adrian Rams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the Secretary of State highlights the scandal of sewage in our seas and rivers. Indeed, last year, raw sewage was dumped into rivers and seas for 3.6 million hours. But since privatisation, 72 billion has been paid to shareholders in dividends, while his own department highlights that it would cost £56 billion to carry out the necessary investment. So privatisation has failed as a model for getting the investment in place. And will the Secretary of State therefore confirm that the Commission will look at the ownership model for water that's going to be effective in addressing this scandal, including considering the option of bringing water back into public hands?
Thank him for his comments and his question. The reason I've ruled out nationalisation is because that would not resolve the problems that we face. We saw in the Olympics in France the River Seine unable to be used for swimming because of pollution. That is a state-owned water system. We see the problems in Scotland. That is a state-owned water system as well. The problems are those of governance and regulation. If we were to look at nationalisation, that would cost up towards £100 billion of public money, money that doesn't exist, and the time it would take to unpick current models of ownership, during which time investment will be choked off, would see our rivers, lakes and seas filled with even more sewage and pollution rather than less. I'm more interested in the purity of our water than the purity of our ideology. I will do what works best as quickly as possible. The Commission will give us guidance on how we change the system to make sure it works for everybody.
Neil Duncan-Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the last few weeks, I've been conducting tests independently with colleagues from Bournemouth University into the lovely Poole Harbour and the waters surrounding there, testing for nitrates and bacteria. What I've noticed talking to colleagues is that the frequency of testing that goes on officially and the number of sites at which tests are carried out has been reduced significantly by the Environment Agency over the years. And I would like to ask the Secretary of State if his Commission will now look at those issues and whether testing and frequency of testing will be included in its work.
Yes, I recognise what he says about Poole Harbour. It is indeed an incredibly beautiful part of the country. I've visited myself several times, and sadly I've also seen the extent and impact of pollution. We are making sure that all sewage outlets are monitored through compulsory means, which isn't the case currently, but the Commission will be looking at how we can improve testing and monitoring of water quality as part of the strengthening of regulation that will form a key part of the Commission's work.
Charlie Dewhurst.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, the Secretary of State mentioned the importance of drainage in reducing pollution incidents caused by flooding. So will he commit to today, while we await the outcome of this commission, to distribute the £75 million allocated by the previous government to internal drainage boards so that farmers in my constituency and others in the River Hull catchment do not have to spend another winter underwater?
Well, unfortunately, he is referring to commitments to spend money that didn't exist. We're waiting for the Chancellor to announce her budget in almost exactly 1 week's time from this dispatch box. We'll find out much more then.
Jessica Tull.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, sewage was dumped 57 times into the precious coastline of my constituency, Bournemouth West, the equivalent of 594 hours of sewage spillage. Our constituents are rightly disgusted by the state of affairs. The Conservatives covered up this scandal for the last 14 years. Can the right honourable member tell me what this new Labour government will be doing to hold companies to account?
I thank her for her question. I had the pleasure of visiting Bournemouth West with her and saw for myself the impact it's having on businesses and tourism in that part of the world, because parents are frightened to let their kids go in the sea at certain times of the day when water contamination has reached unacceptable levels. The Commission will be looking at how we can strengthen regulation and governance to ensure that the practices water companies have got away with over recent years can no longer happen. It will also be looking at how we can bring in the investment that is needed to repair our broken water infrastructure so we can drive economic growth in every part of the country, including, of course, in Bournemouth West.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now then, the use of storm overflows in places like Skegby in Ashfield is absolutely disgusting, and it pollutes my rivers. So can the Secretary of State commit to giving the water companies a deadline to ending the use of storm overflows?
It will be for the Commission to look at what we need to do to improve infrastructure, to fix the broken system that we have at the moment. We are making sure that every overflow has monitoring on it so we know exactly what is coming out of it, and we can therefore take action against the water companies that may be responsible for that.
Jane Kirk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Truro and Falmouth, my constituency, as well as sewage in our bathing waters this week, we've had sewage on the streets in Penryn. The party opposite cut funding to the regulator back in 2015. Could the Secretary of State please confirm that the role of the regulator will be completely reset by this review?
I thank her for her question, and of course I had the pleasure of visiting Truro and Falmouth during the election, and again saw for myself the problems that are happening there. It is of course disgusting to see sewage bubbling up into the streets and even into some people's back gardens, because sewage infrastructure is so broken because the previous government failed for 14 years to bring in the investment necessary to upgrade that infrastructure. This Commission will be looking at how we secure that funding, how we get the infrastructure rebuilt at pace so it can improve the situation that we're hearing about. It will also be looking at regulation and the role of the regulator itself to make proposals as to how we can improve that so we have regulation that is fit for purpose.
Earl Voden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Kingsbridge, in my constituency of South Devon, the residents are literally wading through sewage which is seeping out of the drains in heavy rains due to a mixture of increased sewage capacity due to new houses and ancient culverts which cannot cope. I don't think the residents of Kingsbridge are going to be encouraged by a review and a commission, because that's not going to solve the problems they're going to face this winter. So will the Minister meet with me to discuss this particularly difficult and chronic problem in Kingsbridge, because we need to find a solution, and it hasn't happened for a long time. We desperately need to sort this out.
Thank you. I have, of course, already taken action myself. I had the Water Chief Executives into my office just 7 days after the general election, where we agreed a programme of initial reforms, including ring-fencing customers' money earmarked for investment so it cannot be diverted to be spent on undeserved multi-million-pound bonuses or dividend payments. We have the Water Special Measures Bill going through the House of Lords right now, which will ban the payment of those undeserved bonuses. It's important we understand exactly what has gone wrong in the sector that has led to the situation where regulation does not meet the requirements of either the public or businesses or the economy or the environment. Those will be key proposals that will be coming out of this Commission, and I hope the Honourable Lady will welcome those when they come forward.
Alice MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today, a report found that rivers in the east and London have the worst quality in the UK, with an alarming amount of chemicals found. Citizen science has played a key role up to now in monitoring the quality of our water. Will the Secretary of State join with me in paying tribute to the citizen scientists and volunteers and assure us that their voices will be heard in this important work? Thank you.
She makes a very, very important point, of course. The many campaign groups, citizen scientists, have made a huge impact on, first of all, raising the profile of the sewage scandal affecting our country, but secondly, pointing to some of the ways that we can start to fix it. The Commission around Sir John will have an advisory group that will have representation from campaign groups and consumers on it. There will also be wide engagement with the public, both through the work of the Commission itself and subsequently as we work towards the reform legislation that will reset the sector once and for all.
Dr. Ben Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the absence of a plan, it's always a good idea to do a review. And my constituents are being failed by our local sewage infrastructure, and Thames Water are a total and utter disgrace. But I really welcome the Secretary of State's statement today, because I think I've found an unlikely ally. The Labour government is going to force building on Greenbelt in my constituency with a whole host of new houses, exacerbated by the Liberal Democrat administration's Elmbridge's failure to deliver a local plan. Given the amount of time this Commission will take to report back, and the fact these new houses will cause more sewage requirements, does he agree with me that we should pause and think again about the house building targets until the review has been completed?
Well, I thought he was standing up to apologise for the fact that the Conservative government did absolutely nothing for 14 years other than watch the torrent of effluent increase into our rivers, lakes and seas and pollute them. My honourable friend, the Water Minister, would be more than happy to meet with him to discuss the issues he raises from his constituency.
Billington.
Thank
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I welcome this commission today from my right honourable friend, and would like to point out that last week, for example, in my constituency of East Thanet, 6 beaches were affected by raw sewage dumping. 2 of them, Joss Bay and Stone Bay, were deemed to be to have bad effect of their bathing quality, and yet the verdict was that they were still within the Environment Agency permitted limits. Can my right honourable friend confirm to me that we will have the Commission will investigate the regulatory standards so that when that raw sewage is dumped, there is actually a fine and a punishment for the water companies? I must admit, I must also make my own declaration as a customer of Southern Water and a seawater swimmer.
Yay!
I thank her very much for her question. She is, of course, a well-known environmental campaigner who stands up for her constituents in Thanet, and the many businesses, including tourism businesses, who are affected adversely by the appalling state of our waters. Of course, it is clear regulation and governance has been inadequate for a long time. This is a reset moment where we can finally strengthen that and deliver the clean water that her constituents and mine and all of ours across the House expect to see.
Anne Davies.
Mr Llywelyn. Water is devolved, but of course in Wales we do not have the full range of powers needed to address this scandal. For example, the Senedd cannot regulate the transfer of water by private companies whose catchment area straddles the border, and this of course includes the likes of Hafren and Dyfrdwy. Will the Secretary of State ensure that the Commission considers the full devolution of powers of water and sewage licensing to Wales to empower the Senedd to set higher targets? Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr. This commission is jointly set up by the UK Government and the Welsh Government, and it will report back to both, and it will inform actions that both governments will be taking subsequently, including looking at infrastructure and how we make catchment areas operate better, particularly and including when they cross the borders, as so many do between England and Wales.
Abdisam Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to congratulate the Secretary of State on this Independent Water Commission. I know my constituents will really welcome this review. My constituents in Sheffield Central are seeing a 25% rise in their bills. To them, it doesn't make sense why their bills are going up and the profits of shareholders continue to still be received. Will the Secretary of State give me some reassurance that there will be transparency as an outcome of this review, and that the water companies will be held to account, and that we will reset the focus on consumers instead of profit of companies?
I thank her for the very important point that she makes, and of course it's important that consumers have a very strong voice on the Commission. They will gain that through consumer representation on the advisory group that will be working with Sir John as the Commissioner. She points to the eye-watering level of bill increases that have been proposed by Ofwat already. That, alas, is the price of Tory failure. They allowed the water infrastructure to collapse to such an extent that it costs much more to fix it now than it would have cost had it been maintained properly through those 14 years. I can't undo the damage they caused. I can draw a line in the sand to make sure it can never, ever happen again.
Andrew George.
Mr Speaker, when the Conservatives privatised water, they created risk-free money-printing emporiums, which frankly could pollute our coasts, including my West Cornwall coast, at their convenience. Although the Secretary of State says that the nationalisation is not in scope, and one could understand why, to what extent is company governance going to be within scope, and is it likely that there is a possibility of moving it closer to becoming community benefit societies, or at least installing a community environmental champion who's not in the pay of the company on every board to keep a watch on these companies? Thank you.
Yeah. He makes very important points, and indeed the areas he's referring to will be in scope for the Commission. I hope he will make his own representations to ensure that those points are heard and fully considered before we get the findings in the summer of next year.
Alistair Strathern.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Residents in my constituency have been disgusted by the degradation of our rural waterways right across the east of England, as well as the hollowing out of reservoir capacity right across the country. I really welcome the renewed leadership on these issues we're seeing from the new Secretary of State and the new government. But it's clear that under the last government, weakened regulation and weakened regulators played their part in facilitating the mess we've inherited. What assurances can he give my constituents that we will be beefing up the regulators, giving them the power they need to take the action we all want to see?
Well, he's absolutely right. It was the previous government deliberately weakened the regulators and kept regulation too weak to hold the water companies to account and ensure that we got the investment in that could have kept a better standard of infrastructure and stopped the level of pollution that his constituents and everyone else's have had to face. We've already taken steps through the Special Measures Bill to give the regulator more teeth. The Commission will be looking root and branch at the role of regulation and governance and the regulator to ensure that we have a system that is fit for the future and can ensure and guarantee clean waters for the decades to come.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, if I heard correctly, at the start of his statement, the Secretary of State referenced the River Lug. The River Lug runs through the centre of my constituency of North Herefordshire, and it has been subject, the catchment has been subject to a planning moratorium for more than 5 years because of excess levels of phosphate in that river. But the Secretary of State will be well aware that the reason for that is not sewage pollution primarily, it is agricultural runoff. More than 2/3 due to agricultural runoff, only a quarter due to sewage. And yet, the Government's Water Commission makes essentially no mention of agriculture, just a passing reference. There is nothing in there specifically about addressing this problem. Likewise, the Water Special Measures Bill. With such a narrow approach to addressing water pollution, he will not be able to achieve his aim of cleaning up our rivers and seas. Will he agree with me that the terms of reference need to be changed to incorporate full attention on agricultural pollution as well as sewage? Thank you.
Well, I do hope she will look at the terms of reference which are available on gov.uk because, of course, they will be focusing on the whole catchment areas, and it includes agricultural runoff, which accounts for 45% of water pollution. And where there is an interface between agriculture and polluted water, that is indeed in scope for the work of the Commission.
Noah Law.
I thank the Minister for his statement. And the destruction and contamination of our waterways and even our high streets, as we've seen from sewage pollution in Newquay the other week, is an absolute disgrace which the previous government has failed to address. So, with Pennon Group, our owner of South West Water, paying £112 million in dividends and over £160 million in other finance costs, will the Minister ensure that the Independent Commission, which I greatly welcome, addresses whether we have effective funding models for our water industry?
He's absolutely right. It's disgusting to people to see sewage bubbling up, not just in their high streets, but even in people's gardens, because of broken water infrastructure. And we will be looking for a reset so that we can have a water sector that works for customers and the environment as well as investors.
Alison Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Year 2 pupils of Bishop Tufnell's School in my Littlehampton and Bognor Regis constituency told me of their disappointment last year that they couldn't swim in the sea on their summer day out. As a fellow sea swimmer, I share their disappointment. But winter is coming. There is no time to waste. Pushing the can down the track with this review, this commission, is not good enough. And what I would like to know, having reviewed the activities in my constituency, is how you will be looking at a strategic overview that brings together the activities of all of the different agencies that impact upon this, not sometime next year, but before the real issues that are about to hit every single constituency around the coast of this country right now.
I'm very sorry for the Year 2 pupils at the school that she's referring to in her constituency. I would respectfully remind her that she represents a party that sat back and did nothing for 14 years, while the levels of pollution in our rivers, lakes and seas got far, far worse. And that, I venture to suggest, is why those Year 2 pupils can't go in the water.
Perrin Moon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Sewage polluting Cornish beaches, as we've heard, such as mine in Camborne and Redruth, and specifically in St Agnes, the location of the head office for Surfers Against Sewage, Perranporth and Portreath, has been yet another Conservative scandal damaging our economy and society for years that a Labour government is going to have to clear up. Yeah. Does the Minister agree with me that as well as the economic damage, the damage to mental health of those of us that cannot regularly use the sea should not be underestimated? And will the Commission consider the mental health benefits as part of its work?
Yeah. I thank my honourable friend, and of course I had the pleasure of visiting his constituency during the summer with him as well, and I saw for myself the impact of sewage in the seas in the beautiful beaches around his part of Cornwall. Of course, it's not unusual for a Labour government to come in and have to clean up the Tories' mess, but rarely quite so literally as in the case of sewage in our waterways. I think he makes a very important point about mental health. I hope he will feed that into the Commission, because it's very important they hear all sorts of views about the impact of polluted water as they consider how we can best clean it up.
David Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since being elected in July, Exmouth and Exeter East has been hit by significant sewage issues, and I'm sure the Secretary of State will understand that, and I've written to him recently outlining some of these issues. Although the Commission may bear fruit in future years, there are areas of the country, such as my constituency, that need immediate fixes. Will the Secretary of State please meet with me and the CEO for South West Water to ensure that immediate